Hi, everyone. My name is Zach.
And I'm Zane, and welcome to the A to Z podcast. Thanks for joining us today as we interview Myles. You'll notice that Adam's not here. Where's Adam? Who?
I don't know. Where
Adam's
is it?
not below me in the shadows. Instead, we
Shame.
have Zach. So
Yeah.
Zach is a nice little stand-in here. You'll notice Zach, if you are a follower of the A to Z series, you'll notice that Zach was interviewed last time. You'll see Myles is who we're interviewing today. Zach and I, we do some other content together, but
We dabble.
we dabble. But the important person today is Myles. So Myles, nice to meet you. How you doing, man?
Uh, I'm good. I'm good. Pretty excited to be here. Pretty excited to, see what we can do together with the A to Z. Should be
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah. So when/why did you start playing Magic?
Honestly, in high school, my friends kind of just like were playing a lot, and I played Yu-Gi-Oh as a younger kid, so card games kind of always interested me. And they built me a like Jace Mill deck as my first deck with like Esper, Wall of Denial, Tome Scour, that kind of garbage. So somehow from there, we kind of transitioned into the wonderful blue mage that we are today. I mean, the first spell I remember casting was Spell Pierce. My friend would play a creature, and I'd be like, Spell Pierce. He's like, you still can't do that. And then he'd play another creature, and I'm like, Spell Pierce. He's like, you still can't do that. And then finally, he would play a non-creature spell with 2 mana available. Shocking. And then that was how we first learned that counter spells are pretty good, but you should probably not let your opponent know that you have them.
Okay. All right. Nice. Nice.
So now, when did you start traveling for Magic, and like, how did you finish in your first event?
The first event that I really remember doing well at was Grand Prix Baltimore, where PV and the Channel Fireball team had played Blue-Black Control, and I was actually playing Esper Control in that event with Liliana's, Sorin, etc. And I did pretty well. I like 7-0'd and played against PV in the feature match. And I remember first misplay of my generation was he cast Ratchet Bomb on turn 2, and I have a mana leak. Why would you ever mana leak that, right? You're playing Control. And then what do? Jam Liliana on turn 3, he counters it, and then jam Sword on turn 4, and then it resolves. And then you know what that Ratchet Bomb did? Ticked up to 4 and then blew up my Sorin. Man, that would have been a good mana leak target.
Yeah.
So we learned pretty quickly that you should probably slow down and really analyze what is important in matchups. But I think that was one of my first events, and it really taught me kind of like not everything is so, immediately counter, don't counter. Not every decision is so clear as day.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing to always keep in track, right? Like, is this card actually important in the matchup, and they're just trying to sneak it through, or is this a bait spell, and they're trying to draw it out for a later spell that's more important, and it seemed to
Yeah.
punish you there, but I
Plus,
mean,
it's like what is good game one and what is not good. Even though after game two, I'm sure he took it out. Obviously, game one, it is pretty much what won him the game because that Sorin was not really going to be taken off the board because there was really nothing in that format that took it off the board. There was no O-rings or things like that. So,
right, right.
Oddly enough, that was my first event too.
I do
yeah,
remember that was a very, very strong card at the time.
Yeah.
yeah.
But,
Esper Control with Planeswalkers, the Ali Antrazi special. It's quite good.
yeah. So you go to these paper events, right? You travel. Do you travel frequently to these? Like.
Yeah, pretty much whenever I can. Like a few weeks ago, I kind of last minute went to Baltimore. I'm sorry, excuse me. I last minute went to Pittsburgh. Didn't really do so well playing Grixis Dynavolt Tower. But
Okay.
again, even doing not well in those kind of events really teaches me like the same lessons over and over of picking the right deck and not getting too confident and like, oh, I broke it, even though especially in this standard format where breaking it is so difficult, the decks are so
Hmm.
fast, and that's what it really taught me. And I think that really helped me do better in Baltimore, better in a PPTQ I ended up winning recently, and I think better next week in Grand Prix New Jersey. Is just like playing events very often and playing against the best players in the world will really teach you like what you can and can't do.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So now you say you go to these events all the time. Do you have a preference when it comes to paper Magic versus Magic Online? Do you?
Yeah, I definitely prefer paper. I played a
Okay.
lot of Magic Online when Rally was legal, so I'm kind of good with the clicking, but I always end up misclicking or clicking too fast or missing something, and I like paper much better because I like to actually touch the cards with my hands and kind of feel out my opponent. I feel like it's easier to read your opponent in actual Magic, and I've just played actual Magic much longer. I'm not actually a big fan of online, but I'll use it as a good tool when I need to.
Okay.
It's a fair assessment. So, how do you tailor your sideboard for a particular event, and do you have a particular process going about it?
Yeah, I'm actually a pretty big deck builder and tuner, so I really like to like take a list, like for example, the second place list that in Grand Prix Urcheck with the Avacens and the Ballistas, and I kind of like to like do the ins and outs myself, see what I would want to take out, what I want to put in, and then kind of tailor my sideboard to that. So like if I see that I have way too many cards for like say green black, and I'm not cutting as many cards, then you know what you can kind of swap those cards for. I also like to have cards that are good in in multiple matchups. So, for example, Obnixilis Reignited is really, really good versus Green Black, but it's not that great versus really much else. So that card has kind of been in and out of my Mardu sideboards because it's like okay versus the tower decks after board when they're boarding in like Kalidas or Dragon Master Outcast, but a card kind of like Chandra Torch Defiance, I think, is much better because it's much better versus vehicles. It comes down faster. It can let you play multiple spells in a turn, which I think is really important. So I think having cards that are good in multiple matchups are good, and actually knowing your ins and outs. Because a lot of players will build their deck with those ins and out already in mind, but then you copy their deck and you don't really know what's going on. So then that sideboard is not good for you because you don't know what those ins and outs are.
I think definitely when you pick up a deck, I mean, at least for me, I don't know if you agree with this. I like to first just play the deck the way it is, because they're the one that designed the deck. They're the one that has the reps in with the deck. They know what they're doing with the deck. I assume. I mean, they got second on the GP. I assume they know what they're doing with their deck. But I don't. I probably don't know what's going on with the ins and outs of their deck. So I like to first try their iteration and say, well, I don't understand why this. So I'm going to change it to tailor it to me.
It definitely makes a lot of sense. I definitely like that. I guess like I usually only copy decks that I've had some experience with, but I definitely do the same thing and definitely tell my friends to do the same thing. Like if you're just going to pick up a 4-color list, you really should not change any cards until you've had at least 10 or 15 games in with it. Right. Because obviously, like you said, he did well at the tournament, probably knew what he was doing.
Right. Yeah, like I know personally, I jam at least one league first and then I just, ring it from there.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
So is there, you say you like these sideboard plans, you tailor your deck to beat certain decks on a certain weekend. Do you have a particular sideboard tech in the past that you're like really proud of? Like this one event, I played blank and I was...
Honestly, it was the PPTQ that I won last weekend. I ended up putting, thanks to my good friend Akil Vade, I ended up putting in Avacens into my sideboard and boarding in a 3rd caravan and a 23rd land because I was only on 22 lands main deck with 2 caravans in Mardu vehicles. So I played against the Mardu Mirror multiple times and it was phenomenal. They never were able to really play around it because the early game is so dominated by Heart of Kiran and Aethersphere Harvester or Caravan that Disintegration usually gets used pretty quickly. So by the mid to late game, I was able to just kind of like flash in Avacen, either completely block down their board and blow them out, or even if they played around it, it would still come down, not really be able to get blocked again because I would usually kill their heart or their, etc. Aethersphere Harvester or whatever. So I feel like Avacen was really, really good for me past weekend, as well as kind of Painful Truths and Anguish I'm making for the green, black, and the slower matchups. Because I feel like you're able to take out your cheaper creatures and then put in, those kind of higher impact cards. And I feel like everyone's playing Skywhaler Shot for whatever reason, as opposed to Anguish I'm making, and having that extra slot for that tower deck. Because, like, again, that Rug Tower deck is, like, kind of good. But I think it only is really good because no one's really prepared for it, and people are kind of more gearing their decks very inbred wise with vehicles, 4-color, and green black being the best decks.
For sure. So do you find working with others as a group is helpful for sideboard preparation, and how so?
Absolutely. I think that Magic, even though it is a single person game, is very much a team game as well. I have a nice, local guys at home that we do a lot of testing at night. And I mean, obviously the A1BN crew, Zach Canner included, we all do a good amount of testing. I think really talking through with other people what your sideboard plans are helps a lot because they know, maybe they know the other side of the matchup better. Like Zach is a mid-range master, of course. So if I'm playing a control deck and I'm going to explain to him my mid-range, sideboard, then he would really know like what is actually good versus Jund, what isn't good versus Jund, even though, he may have more games with the Jund side, I also have more games on the blue-eyed side. So it's definitely helpful to get other people's insight for sure.
I think something that's underrated is the amount of insight you can get from other people, the amount of feedback you can get. Like, people are there to help each other, and like, testing with a group is great, but not just testing, but brainstorming with the group is valuable. Not just the games, but the thoughts that are just as important as actually playing the games with a deck.
Definitely. I think theory crafting is one of my more favorite parts of Magic, and I feel like just sitting down and just having that kind of Magic conversation. Like the pros, that's kind of what they do for drafting. They have like everyone sits down, they pull up a little whiteboard, and they just start writing, what cards they think are the first picks, and they just kind of discuss it before they even jump into a draft at all.
Yeah.
So I feel like that brainstorming and getting your idea of what you're going to do before you do it is almost as valuable, if not more.
Because I know in the past for me, like there'll be like card A that I think is just bad, and then I'll talk to a friend about it, and they'll tell me why they think card A is good, and it'll be something I didn't see, and this is something I wouldn't have seen if I didn't bounce off ideas with friends and other teammates. So like I
Exactly.
think that's like a really important aspect as well, because sometimes you can't see all 100% interactions. So
Mhm.
like having someone that could see the 5% you miss is probably the most important 5% of why you would play that A card.
Definitely. Kind of like going back to the question from before about like what a sideboard card I thought was really underrated. Like in my blue eye control deck, I'm running Core Firewalker, and most people would think that is for the
Okay.
burn matchup mainly. But like in the blue mirrors, all the removal spells are red. Kolaghan's Command, Lightning Bolt, Terminate. So the only way they really have to remove it is Path to Exile. And after board, when the matchup becomes so grindy and so like kind of get your threat down and get
Mhm.
behind it, almost like a Delver style, I think Core Firewalker is such a powerful card. And I kind of did learn that from a friend at FNM who played it against me in a modern FNM and crushed me with it while I was playing Grixis back in the day. And I was
Oh,
like, wow,
cool.
that was really smart of you to bring in. He's like, yeah, I kind of was just shuffling through my sideboard and figured, hey, it might be good. And I was unable to kill it. So, because I
Wow.
mean, even like like if you're running a Wandering Fumarole, you can't even block it. So I'm saying, or like
Yeah.
Creeping Tar Pit, I'm saying you're going to trade it, you're going to end up trading that off with it. And then that's just good value right there.
Yeah. That's really good. That seems very insane. Like just having a core firewalker against a non-burn deck. It just
Right? And then they're just unable to kill it, and they take like 10 damage over the course of 5 turns,
yeah.
and then that's what the matchups
And
come
they
down
and
to.
they probably have gained 3 and
Exactly,
They bring back
just
the path, and then you don't have any more in your deck, and then you just like play that mind game.
exactly, and then you mize them with like your Colonnade or whatever because they had to use the path there, and then Bolt isn't good versus Colonnade, so they weren't able to line up the answers with the threats that you had.
mhm. That's really interesting. So the common myth of sideboard guides. What do you think about sideboard guides? Because do you think like it's really helpful? Because the myth is that it's very helpful and it will help you in a lot of matchups. Do you personally use sideboard guides, and what do you think about sideboard guides in general?
I don't really like sideboard guides very much. I think that it is too much of holding someone's hand when you tell them exactly what you want to cut and exactly what you want to bring in, because I
Okay.
think then they're not going to be able to tune or tailor their sideboard for the next week. Because most formats are ever changing, and every week you kind of need to be doing something different, or at least attacking matchups in a different way. So if you're telling them like cut this card for this card, then they're just going to think, oh, that's the perfect way to sideboard. I don't need to change anything.
Hmm.
I do think it's helpful to tell people what are bad in matchups. I do think it's helpful to tell people why cards are in your sideboard for what certain matchups. But
Yeah.
no, I don't really like doing sideboard guides at all.
I
I,
Go ahead.
so I know I have a friend, good friend, Christian Calcano, and he once told us a story where he had this dedicated sideboard plan at the PT, and he just variated off it for one match, and then he learned that his version was infinitely better than the version that he was getting from his team to use. So then, like just like because when you go like if you just use that and match it up 100%, you don't see other lines and you don't see other ways that like, probably is bad. Like I know
Mhm.
me and Miles have disagreed with sideboard plans, and that's why if I use a guide and I use his guide, I would disagree with it, and then I'll be just stuck using something I don't think is good, and vice versa. It happens both ways.
Exactly.
So
You just never want to have like kind of like going back to the ratchet bomb situation. You never want to have a when X happens, you do Y, because then you're not going to be able to amend that in the moment and then really understand what's going on. And
Hmm.
exactly kind of what Zach was saying. In the moment, if a sideboard plan seems not great, kind of like I was playing as a vehicles mirror yesterday at FNM, my opponent showed me Shock Game 1. You'd usually think that Thalia Heretic Healer would be phenomenal versus vehicles. But if he has shocks in his main, then how many shocks is he going to have after board? Probably too many. So I don't want to play a 3-drop into his shock. And then
Right.
lo and behold, game 2, he ended up playing 3 shocks. I didn't have Thalia in my deck, and it was phenomenal. But
Right.
if I was going by a sideboard guide, I'd never cut Thalia because you would think that it would be good in that matchup.
Also, like, I think there's something to be said about knowing how you sideboard. Like, like if you don't know how you're going to sideboard against a matchup off the top of your head, you probably don't know your deck well, and you don't know how it plays against other decks really well.
Definitely.
Like if you're like going to a modern event and be like, all right, I have the sideboard guide for the top, 10 decks, and then you like play against one of those top 10 decks, and you're like, okay, this, and this, but like, what if their version's different? And you saw that their version was different. But
Exactly.
you didn't sideboard differently? That's just insane to me. Like, why would
Plus, you
you
have to
do that?
sideboard for what they're sideboarding for as well.
Right.
You know, like the Death Shadow aggro deck, I'm sure that guy rolled so many people by boarding into like Liliana of the Veil and Lingering Souls after board because people were boarding in all these hate cards for Death Shadow and their aggressive like Become Immense plan, and then they just grinded them out with Lingering Souls.
Yep.
Especially that new version. Oh, yeah.
So next question: How? Like I know there's different like Magic events, right? Like you have like PPTQs, IQs, FNMs, Opens, and GPs. Do you take in like a different account of how you sideboard and how you build your sideboard?
Definitely. I think for FNM, you can. That's almost when I metagame the most, is because I usually know, like, okay, Tommy's on vehicles, you know, Mike is on four color, this guy's on this deck. So you can very much gear your sideboard almost specifically to the matchups that you're going to see. At like an IQ or a slightly bigger event, I think it's a little harder. But again, I think the main meta decks will be there. So again, you can kind of gear your deck. Like if it's modern, you're going to see Infect Affinity, Burn and Zoo, Green Black
Right.
X, Blue decks, etc. A Grand Prix, I think, is when it becomes almost the most difficult, and kind of like when that whole how many buys situation comes up. Because if you have two buys, you're probably going to be able to dodge the random guy on like Legion Loyalist Goblin Guy deck in Modern. But if you're not, then maybe you have to, you know, have some weirder sideboard cards or more of a vast sideboard to try to attack those weird decks that you're going to see. So I think it's very important to really understand, like, to have your kind of your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I feel like that's why looking at deck lists and analyzing other people's sideboards is very, very important.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I feel like the IQ, you could still kind of metagame a little bit.
Definitely.
I remember I went to an IQ during Eldrazi Winter, and I was playing Affinity. And I remember saying, today there's going to be a lot of Eldrazi and a lot of Affinity. I know it's going to happen. And so my sideboard was just like nuts. Like it only beat those. My sideboard only beat those two decks, right? Didn't lose a single match against those decks all day. And guess how many were in the room? There were like out of like 25 people, there were 10 Eldrazi and 5 other Affinities. And like I was like, all right, well I did, and then I easily top aided. I lost against like other random decks because I couldn't beat them because my sideboard was like stunted on.
Of course.
But like I was like, well, I never lost the match against those two decks because I knew it was going to be that meta. Like,
And I think that's very important for sure.
Yeah.
Like the Patrick Sullivan most recent burn deck in Legacy. He's like, I don't think I can expect to beat these Reanimator decks or these bigger creature decks. So he has no Searing Blazes in the main, no fetch lands, only the 2-mana deal 4 to both players. I forget what it's called.
Flame Rift.
Flame Rift.
Yes, he's playing Flame Rifts, and then out of his board, he has like 6 Searing effects, like the Sulfuric Vortex, and it's very, very meta-dependent deck, but it probably crushes Miracles, crushes these new Leovold decks, and I think that's very much what the metagame is. So even in a format like Legacy that you think is so vast, I think that this whole sideboarding and metagaming thing is very, very big.
So like I know in the past, it kind of piggyback off the last question where we, like the different events. When I used to go to FNM and stuff like that, that's when I would try like a different card in my sideboard because I didn't care so much about like the outcome of FNM. And I saw something I like want to go to an open and be like, all right, let me try random Z card in my sideboard and see if it works. So like these FNMs also used as a testing process of how you change your sideboard, like changing your sideboard guides, your plan, different cards and all that. So I think that like for someone
Definitely.
who is more competitive, that's like probably a better idea, like better way of using FNM too as like a resource as testing.
Yeah, I mean, I think people doubt FNM a little bit, but I mean, I know at least in this standard format, I went 4-0 at FNM yesterday, only played against 2 vehicles decks, a green-black deck, and a 4-color Sealy deck. So even though the players might not have been the most high-caliber players, the decks were definitely real, and I think the testing in some ways is real. Plus, as a good player or a higher skill player, how are the other players going to get better if you're not there to teach them and show them the ways, the way that you were also shown and taught? Yeah. So I think that some players kind of knock FNM and kind of only want to play, you know, the highest EV or the highest competitive skill level event, and I think that's unfortunately, you know, not exactly a good thing. I kind of like the players like the Reed Duke who go to Toy Wiz and kind of, you know, crush these events and teach the players, show the players, you know, what's up, who's good, and how to be good, because, you know, we all got taught, so everyone else needs to get taught.
That's right. And I think a similar thing we done online for like testing a new sideboard card, like for instance, it took me like I tested Bitter Blossom in my Affinity sideboard. Love it, and I played in all my events now. But I tested multiple leagues with it before I actually went to a decent sized paper event with it. I didn't play it in an IQ. I didn't play it in the regionals. I didn't play it in like the open I went to, or the open I went to, because like I didn't want to like just fall on my face with this dead sideboard card, and I wanted to test it. And like I wasn't able to go to the. If I was able to go to the FNMs, I would have tried it there. But I just wasn't able to get there. So I used the league instead, and over so many X matches, I found out it is actually really good.
It's so good. I've seen it in play multiple times. Like it's kind of gross.
I know someone who plays 4.
4? That's a bit much. It's excessive. So kind of a question I don't know if you guys had, but I had for you guys. Do you guys shuffle in the 15? Because I'm a huge advocate of shuffle in 15 and then take out 15. And I feel like that really helps kind of decide how to sideboard for the future. I was wondering what your guys' opinions were.
You want to take that first, Zane?
So I don't do it simply because I forget what, like, I just forget, like, it takes too much brain power for me to do that every single game or every single match. And, like, I understand the concept behind it, but like it drains me too much to do that. And,
that's definitely relevant.
And I understand that, and I don't want to like drain myself doing that, especially in like standard where I don't know my deck as well. Like I know it well, but I don't know it as well. Where it's like, oh man, what card did I forget? And like I would present 61 all the time by accident because I would just miss a card.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess as a deck builder, I always kind of have my 75 in my head, and I just felt over time it's definitely helped. So I mean, you could always try it again on those smaller events. You could try shuffling in 15 and kind of honing those skills.
Yeah. So I know on my end, like at FNMs and IQs, I really don't do that. But if I go to Open or GP that has more, I guess higher reward for doing it, I always do it. Like. And especially when it comes to standard, where I'm definitely a standard player and I know standard the best, I can like just look at my 15 and be like, all right, I want these 5 cards, and I'll just board it in, and then be boarding all 15 and know exactly what to cut because I know shuffling through my deck and siphoning through it, I know exactly what I don't want.
Makes sense.
I mean, it's fair. I haven't done the practice enough. That's something I haven't practiced enough, and like it's something I would want to do eventually because. Early on playing Magic, I didn't realize how important it was, or how much of a like I not a necessity, but it's information hiding. It's that sort of thing. I
almost think it's less than that, and also more when I start shuffling in 15, I feel like that helps me kind of break away from my own sideboard guide. Because obviously I build my sideboard with the plan in mind to board in X. But if I shuffle in 15 and I start cutting cards and I'm looking through and I'm like, wait, maybe this card seems good. And like, oh, I also end up pulling out more often than less. I end up pulling out 17, 18, and then I get to start amending my sideboard plans from there and kind of putting in more cards back into my deck and kind of seeing things from there. So it gets me like a new perspective. Even on a deck I've played for a very long time.
So kind of like to piggyback off that, I know when like in between games 2 and 3, like after I boarded, unless it is 3 games, do you go into your sideboard, and even if you just keep it the same as, you put 4 random cards in to take them back out, so your opponent thinks you're sideboarding? Because that also plays into it.
Definitely. I think it depends on the matchup and depends on like if it's very play draw dependent on how I'm sideboarding. Like in the Mardu mirror, for example, keeping in your Toolcraft exemplars is usually seen as a bad thing. But if you're on the play, sometimes you could just board in your Toolcrafts and your Meta Motors back in and just run over your opponent because you're on the play and they're going to be behind. So I actually did that against good old Benton Madsen in basically winning him for top 8 at the PPTQ because I was on the play for game 3 and I put in my Toolcrafts and then pulled them out again because I wanted him to maybe sideboard differently, expecting him to be on the back foot, even though that's not exactly where my sideboard plan was.
Interesting. Okay. The mind games.
Exactly.
It's all mind games.
It's very relevant. It's definitely important, especially when you respect your opponent like I did there. And, if you think your opponent is going to be on that same level as you, I definitely think it's important to do that.
I think it's also especially important with paper Magic because you can see what you're doing and they can see your thought process as you're doing it.
Yeah, like the Rug Tower deck or the Grixis Tower deck. Those decks always seem to kind of be cutting their towers or putting their towers back in for these creature plans. I feel like there is when it really matters the most. Because like game 2, I don't cut any of my removal versus tower decks. I expect them to be boarding in Thing in the Eyes, Whirler Virtuoso, Dragon Master Outcast. I want my pushes for that garbage. I'm not losing to that. But game 3, that's when things maybe get a little more complicated. Are they going to be putting their towers back in or what?
Definitely.
Yeah, but if they don't... Go ahead.
So like I know I definitely in those matchups I don't shave them all. I definitely trim them though because like, I don't want to flood out on that same effect. Just in case they don't have it.
But if you don't even do the whole like pretending that you're putting stuff in for game 3. Even if you keep your deck the same way, then your opponent's going to know exactly what's up, and then that kind of gives up the whole point of having a creature plan.
Exactly.
That makes sense. So, this has been a great time having you on, Myles.
Thanks.
Really
wow, times are up already.
Yeah, we really appreciate you joining us. And
It was a good time.
Yeah, it was definitely
talking
fun.
about sideboarding and deck building, and we look forward to talking to you in the future with actual Adam, not fake Adam down here.
Definitely. I kind of liked fake Adam, though. He had some good insight.
Fake Adam is God.
Yeah, plus he had the sweet Game of Thrones map at the back. You know, I mess with that.
I mean,
Westeros.
fake Adam's pretty sweet. I like fake Adam, but
I like both.
He
if
won't
we could
replace
have
real
everyone.
Adam. He won't replace real Adam.
You can never replace real Adam. He does so much work for the site. I just wanted to give him a shout out. Like dealing with me this past week and like my first article, repping it, Blue Eye Control, if you want to read it. But he does a lot for the site, and I just respect that a lot. He has a family, he has a job, and everything, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of heart to do what he does.
So.
But fake Adam's good too.
No, fake Adam's great.
So thanks for joining. And thank you all for listening / watching today. You can always follow our other A to Z's, and hope to see you next time on A to Z.
A to Z. Thanks for having me, guys.